Turkey is headed for a presidential runoff. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu and this is The Heat. Voters in Turkey will be heading back to the ballot box at the end of May to decide who they want as their next president. Longtime leader Recep Tayyip Erdogan fell just short of the 50% required to win outright after a weekend election. We begin with this report from CGTN's Mikhail Bardavid in Istanbul.
The race to determine who the next president of Turkey will be continues, as Turkey's High Election Board announced neither incumbent President Recep Tayyip Erdogan nor his main rival of the Nation Alliance, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, managed to succeed in surpassing the 50% threshold needed to win during the first round.
According to the current unofficial results, Mr. Recep Tayyip Erdogan received 49.51% of the vote, Mr. Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu 44.88%, Mr. Sinan Oğan 5.17%, and Mr. Muharrem İnce 0.44%.
%0.44 oy aldığı görülmüştür.
Parties now have the opportunity to present their objections to the High Election Board, which will make their decisions on the objections on Thursday. On Friday, the official election results will be declared. However, it is now clear that Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and presidential candidate Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu will face a runoff election on May 28th. Both leaders made optimistic statements about their chances to win the second round. Kılıçdaroğlu said he would stand tall and stressed he would surely be victorious, while Erdogan emphasized that he had secured a lead of more than 2.5 million votes over his rival Kılıçdaroğlu. During the runoff, the third presidential candidate in Sunday's election, nationalist Sinan Oğan, may be influential if he endorses one of the other candidates, as he managed to secure over 5% of the votes.
We will consult with our voter base for our decision in the runoff, but we already made it clear that the fight against terrorism and sending refugees back are our red lines.
Campaigns for the runoff election are expected to begin at full speed. Erdogan and Kılıçdaroğlu will have 2 weeks to make their final arguments to voters, explaining why they are the best choice to lead Turkey for the next 5 years. Mikhail Bardavid, CGTN, Istanbul.
And now for more perspective on this, we're joined from Turkey by Melda Dogan. She is an independent journalist. Also joining us from Istanbul is Hakan Camuz. He is the Director of International Law at Stoke White law firm in London, and he's a commentator on Turkish politics. Joining the discussion here in Washington is Giran Ozcan. He is the Executive Director of the Kurdish Peace Institute. And from Maryland, joining us too is Yenal Kucuker. He is a regional vice president for the Assembly of Turkish American Associations. Welcome to all of you. Melda, so let's look at the picture in Turkey right now. As we just heard, it's headed for a runoff. The two top contenders, Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, did not get the required 50% for an outright win. So what is your assessment of what happened and where this heads to now?
Well, it looks like people in Turkey will hold their breath for 2 more weeks now. For weeks we have been waiting this Sunday's elections to see how it will end up, as this is the most important election in the last 2 decades that could shape the country's future. Now, 2 weeks later, we will have a second round where Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the current president, and his rival Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu will compete against each other. Well, who is the winner and who is the loser of these elections is it has been actually an interesting race, I will say. Sunday's vote was really interesting and surprising in many ways. Sinan Oğan, the third candidate, who has won about 5%, more than 5% of the votes, is actually the winner of these elections, because he will define and his voter base will decide who will be the next president of Turkey, basically, as both candidates couldn't, both of the main candidates couldn't reach the 50% threshold. Sinan Oğan's decision to support which party will make a big change in this case. I can say that Sinan Oğan's voter base consists mainly of nationalist people. Some of them are MHP supporters who has been angry towards MHP due to their alliance with President Erdogan, and also some of their latest decisions, such as not backing the Sinan Ateş party members' murder in the past months. Some of Sinan Oğan voters are CHP voters who have been angry for Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu kind of partnering with HDP. Some of them come from Recep Tayyip Erdogan's voter base. So it's going to be an interesting race.
Okay, Hakan Camuz, this is the first time in 2 decades that Erdogan is facing a runoff. He is ahead after the first round of voting, as we look at the numbers there. But why was this race so tough for him and so close?
You and I have been on this program several times, most of the time after the elections, that he wins. And we talk about this all the time. If you realize that this is going to be the 11th time he's defeating Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, and if he actually goes for the second run, which we will, it's going to be the 12th time because he will win. There's no doubt about it. There's an acceptance in the country that he will actually win. But the whole system has changed now. This is the first time we're actually going through a proper election with a new system. This is the first time Turkey is going to election with the 2 runoffs, if you like. So it's going to be a new experience for everyone. We have second election in 2 weeks' time, and we don't even know how the campaign is going to run again. So we're all kind of, as Melda said, expecting this new experience as a country. This time around, it was really difficult. Think about it. The whole Western media, entire world was watching it. Media had a massive amount of negative publicity against him, and he was still successful. He had 6 different political parties joining together with their entire base. He still won the election. He has a majority in the parliament, and he has a more vote than all those 6 parties put together, and the HDP tacit but full support, which is going to make the 7th party against one man, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who is a political maestro, almost the genius of Turkish politics. And you and I have been on this program several times. He has gone through 15 elections, referendum, local elections, and etc. And all of them, you and I have spoken, and I've said the same words, but I'm going to say again on this one, which is not a surprise to me, but a surprise to everybody else, because people think that they're going to somehow defeat Erdogan by coming out with false allegations, accusations of being autocrat and dictator and everything. Yet, we had one of the most participated election in the world. 93.6% of population took part in this election. Free election, no problems, no arguments, no clashes. Some people claim there's going to be bloodbath in the streets of Turkey because of this. What happened? Democracy, election, everything happened as it meant to happen because of him.
Giran, Ozcan, I mean, though we heard Hakan Camuz there describing Erdogan as a political maestro, a genius, but days before the actual vote took place, polls were showing us that he would lose this particular election. But you think the opposition can pull together before the runoff in 2 weeks?
Well, firstly, I mean, the description of Recep Tayyip Erdogan as a political maestro, I don't know if that holds a lot of water. I mean, I think elections generally become easier when you have 90% control of the national media, the mainstream national media, and you're freely able to imprison dissidents and opposition politicians. There are many members of the HDP, a pro-Kurdish political party in Turkey, who are in prison right now. There are many journalists in prison in Turkey. Turkey is one of the biggest prisoners of journalists in the world. And so, you know, being a political maestro when you have that kind of power in a country like Turkey is probably a bit of a stretch, I'd say.
All right.
But on your second question, I do think the opposition has 2 weeks to recover and gather itself together because, as Melda in Istanbul said, your guest in Istanbul said, there's a 5% difference in the vote right now. Erdogan won by a 5% margin, but we have a third candidate who will ultimately decide where he directs his base in the runoff that we're going to see on May 28th. So I think elections have a funny way of embarrassing people that make grand assumptions before. I'd say the first round probably embarrassed a few pollsters, and the second round might embarrass Hakan Camuz, your guest in Istanbul.
All right, Hakan Camuz, very briefly, please, I want to give you a chance to respond to what you just heard there, that Erdogan had something of an advantage in this election.
The entire social media and a massive amount of Western media and their bosses and the entire internet was full of information about Erdogan that actually disputes your panel guests' claims about Erdogan. Yes, there's a mainstream media in Turkey that is controlled. Majority of them is correct. We're not going to deny the reality, but that doesn't make the success story of Recep Tayyip Erdogan as a politician and as a leader for the single reason. No. What makes it successful is the people who vote for him. And if your panelists can actually refute the fact that he has got more votes this time around, and he has increased his power base, then he can't deny the fact that he's actually the political maestro I'm actually talking.
All right, I want to move to Yenal Kucuker. Great to have you with us. As Melda told us at the beginning of the show, this election is being looked at as the most important in Turkey's history. As she pointed out, this is going to decide the future of Turkey. Why is that? Why are the stakes so high this time?
For those who travel to Turkey or are interested in traveling to Turkey, let me start with something. The tourism, the title was that Turkey never ceases to amaze. It's really interesting that Turkish developments in Turkey basically are the same here. Basically, if you want to utilize that title, Turkey, everybody thought that it was really predictable, you know, based on the recent outcomes, and here we are looking at something totally unique and haven't seen in Turkey's modern Turkey's history. So, and why is that important? I'll tell you the perspective from the United States as someone who's been living here for the past 23 years. Turkey is still an important ally, regardless of what happens and who rules the country. And Turkey plays an important role in NATO, with Russia, relations in Russia, in the Mediterranean. In fact, just recently, right before the elections, I got together with a former Republican congressman who was intimately and closely involved in U.S.-Turkey relations for more than a decade. They were still interested in watching and following the outcomes as to what was going to happen, because whatever happens in Turkey will definitely have an impact here in the United States. So it's still unpredictable. Depending on who you ask, the outcome is unpredictable, but there's certain predictions involved, and I do agree to a certain extent with Mr. Hakan Camuz in London. I think for those who are outside of Turkey may have misread some of the signs that were already there.
Okay, Melda, I want to get to the whole discussion about Turkey's membership of NATO, etc., in just a while. But let's talk about Erdogan's main rival. This is Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu. He is promising to bring down inflation. He's promising to regain the confidence of foreign investors. I mean, what can you tell us about him? And, I mean, was it a hard sell for him to get opposition voters on his side?
Well, at several points, actually, in several points, he's very much the opposite of Erdogan. During this election campaign, especially, we have seen that Erdogan has used a very divisive language, blaming the opposition for supporting the terrorists, for campaigning for LGBT, which is completely okay, but that wasn't even like the main campaign rhetoric of the opposition. And Erdogan tried to use those things that will somehow put its voter base stick together against Kılıçdaroğlu. So against all of this, Kılıçdaroğlu was quite, in a way, welcoming, and he brought this coalition together, 6 different parties from very different backgrounds. We have İYİ Party, which is nationalistic. We have DEVA and Gelecek, who were actually created by 2 former AKP ministers, and we have Saadet Partisi, which is an Islamist party.
Yeah.
So Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu is the man who changed CHP from what it used to be 15 years ago, a Kemalist party who was quite distanced from the society, to a party that has that opens its doors to everyone. And Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, as his character himself, he's also in a calm man. He's just the opposite of Erdogan.
Yeah.
But right in the beginning of this race, both within the party and in the country, he wasn't really the best candidate. He wasn't deemed as the best candidate of the opposition. The opposition voter base wanted either İmamoğlu, Istanbul's mayor, or Ankara Mayor Yavaş to run for presidency. Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu was not the best candidate they wanted.
Yeah.
So he kind of had difficulties also to convince his voter base. But later on in the campaign, he was doing pretty much well with this inclusive approach.
Yeah. Giran, let's talk about the economy. I mean, this is one of the major issues in the election, isn't it? I mean, the country has been going through something of a cost of living crisis. Inflation is running very high. We have Erdogan, who's promising to get inflation to under 10% by 2024. That pledge by him, that promise, was that a winning message?
I mean, if you go just simply by the figures, yes. But when you look at, by all institutional metrics, Erdogan should have lost this election in a landslide. I mean, over the last, especially over the last 7 or 8 years, the Turkish economy has been plummeting. Growth has slowed. The Turkish lira is losing value by the day. And I think if you asked Turks on the street about how deep their pockets go today, how far their salaries go today, generally we get negative responses and people are getting poorer and poorer. But I would say that the force, the Sunni Turkish nationalistic force in Turkey proved itself quite the force in this election. Erdogan was able to shift the debate from the economy, from the economic downturn, to an existential threat to the country grounded on Sunni Turkish nationalism. And even with the opposition candidate, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, the debate between the 2 frontrunners wasn't about the country's economy. It wasn't about the direction of the country, both domestically and internationally. It was more so about identity politics, and Erdogan was able to hammer home quite successfully, actually, the opposition candidate Kılıçdaroğlu's ethnic and religious identity. Kılıçdaroğlu, as the leader of the founding party of the Turkish Republic, the CHP, is an ethnic Kurd and also a member of a minority religion in Turkey, a very repressed minority religion in Turkey. He's an Alevi. Erdogan successfully exploited this in every city that he went to, highlighting this identity of his, and through this identity, creating a false relationship between him and the PKK. There were several meetings that he conducted in which he had the video with Kılıçdaroğlu and PKK fighters alongside each other, creating the myth that these 2 forces were acting hand in hand. So I'd say that the biggest success that Erdogan pulled out the hat, I think, in this election atmosphere was he shifted the debate from the bread and butter issues to ones of identity, to ones of existential angst.
Hakan Camuz, what is your view on the economy factor in this election? I mean, as Ozcan just told us a moment ago, I mean, normally the received wisdom is that people vote on pocketbook issues, not on foreign policy or anything like that, and that's true for most countries around the world. But as Giran just pointed out, the Turkish currency, the lira, has been losing value. The economy has been going in the wrong direction. Inflation is extremely high. If you add to that all that criticism that we saw of Erdogan when the earthquake hit Turkey, there was something like 50,000 people killed, tens of thousands lost their homes. Yet even in that area, he did very well. How do you explain that?
He is the only one who did very well. But just to point out that I actually want to say clearly, Giran is quite agreeing with what I've said earlier about how much of a genius Erdogan is, and he does accept it, which I appreciate the fact that he kind of joins me in celebrating his skillful, masterful political conduct in this country. People need to understand social engineering doesn't work anymore. And the voters in this country look at something else, not just the economy. Economy has been down and up in this country in its entire history since its foundation. And a political crisis, sorry, economical crisis is something this society is used to. We will just work harder and get it better, and they trust that he will do this. I mean, the clearest evidence of this is, like you said, the 10 cities where we had a massive earthquake. This has never happened to any country in the world, the size and the scale of it. And yet people trust that he's the one who's going to deliver and fix their problems.
Yeah.
Nobody else.
Okay.
So this should give you how much trust he has. Whether if the economy is bad, they trust that he will fix it. Okay. If everything else is there, he's the one who's going to actually lead this country. That's why they voted for him. It's quite clear and very, very obvious that Turkish people love him, they vote for him.
Okay, you know, I want to talk a little bit more about the impact of this election on Turkish foreign relations, its role in NATO for one, its relationship with the United States for another. Of course, Turkey is a member of NATO, but, you know, Erdogan has managed to straddle the sort of ideological divide. He has a relationship with the United States. He also has a very good relationship with Moscow. It's a sort of hybrid approach, isn't it? If he wins, are we going to see more of this?
Absolutely. I think we will definitely going to see more of that. In fact, Turkish foreign policy and the Turkish foreign minister has been in that basically seat for over 2 decades. So definitely stability is the name of the game at this point. And I guess you mentioned earlier, Anand, that you know, voters do not really think about foreign policy when they're voting, and I totally agree. And that's the same for here, U.S. and Turkey or any other country. But at the same time, stability is important. I guess that's part of the reason why I voted. And sometimes, and again, depending on who you're reading and what sources are you looking at, there seemed to be somewhat of a preference to continue with that stability over somebody else, because there are a lot of critical issues between U.S. and Turkey, and U.S.-Turkey relations did deteriorate, unfortunately. As someone who was intimately involved and can still, to a certain extent, intimately involved in U.S.-Turkey relations, I can tell you it's not what it used to be. Between 2008 until the coup attempt, or a couple of years before, that was sort of like the golden era of U.S.-Turkey relations in the last decade. So that's definitely not the case anymore.
Yeah, you know, Kunal, there was an interesting tweet from Richard Haas, whom you probably know. He is the president of the Council on Foreign Relations, and he said, no matter the outcome, no matter who wins, for Turkey, Turkey is going to remain an ally of the United States in name only.
Well, that's an interesting. I've seen a lot of fair share of criticism of Turkey and the Erdogan administration on foreign policy. And U.S. and Turkey weathered a lot of challenging moments. Obviously, there's a lot of criticism. Erdogan, it's no secret, by the way, Erdogan administration foreign policy is not liked in the United States. As I mentioned, I got together with a former congressman who was intimately involved in U.S.-Turkey relations, and he basically voiced his opinion as to there's a lot of opposition to this day from his colleagues that are still in Congress. He's not a liked figure in Washington, D.C. So that is not going to change if he stays in power, obviously. I do not really expect any change in foreign policy. We'll probably continue to see more of the same that we've seen in the past 5 years from him.
Right. Melda, another big issue in Turkey, of course, is the refugee issue, Syrian refugees in the country, 4 million of them in the country. And polls show that a large number of Turks want them to go back home, back to Syria. Did this feature in the election at all?
Well, the Syrians issue has been ongoing, and actually racism towards Syrians has been rising since millions are still in more than 4 million are still in Turkey, but I wouldn't say that was the most heated issue of this election. Of course, it was one of the topics that people were very angry about, and Muharrem İnce, who has actually left the presidential race just days before the elections, was heating up that topic, and his voter base was quite keen on anti-refugee agenda, but still this wasn't really the biggest issue in this election. In this election, the top two issues were actually number one, economy, number two, the slow response to the earthquake, and refugees, number three. That's also related to the economy somehow. There's certainly a rising nationalism in Turkey, and for sure that has been reflected on the polls. We can see that MHP has kept its votes, and Sinan Oğan has also had 5%. So definitely nationalism is on rise.
Yeah. Hakan Camuz, very quickly, I've only got about a minute left. There were also parliamentary elections, and Erdogan's AK party did very well in those elections. They're heading for a majority in parliament. What does that mean for the presidential runoff?
Quite likely that he's going to win the presidential runoff election. I mean, the atmosphere here in Istanbul, where I am right now, is very positive. I know there's going to be some different version of the campaign that we're going to see in the next few days. After the official announcement on Thursday, it will kick off. But I think he will win again quite clearly. And as our colleague Selda said, most of the voters from Sinan Oğan's camp will come towards Erdogan, because he's the one who's going to address the issues that they have. And he will probably pass 50% threshold second time around easily.
Okay, that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thank you for watching.